You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 91. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Bill Brewer. Bill is a member of the faculty of the College of Health Sciences and Technology at the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. He serves as Director of Exercise Sciences with the Wegman School of Health and Nutrition. In July 2013, as a result of his first ever colonoscopy, he was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. He underwent a surgical hemocolectomy to remove 1/3 of his colon, including the stage 3 tumor. It was during his recovery that he seized the opportunity to do something he had always wanted to do and wrote a novel, Tear of the Assassin, which is published under a pen name. Early detection saved his life. Surviving cancer made him realize that life's too short to strive to achieve your dreams. His latest book in the David Dygert series is going to be released on March 10th, and it is called Blood of the Assassin. And you can check that book out at thrillingreads.com/Brewer, Brewer. During this interview, we'll talk to Bill about his writing process, his books, colonoscopies, early detection, which is so important for you. If you haven't gotten your colonoscopy and you're over 50, go do it. I did mine this year. So just wanted to put that message out there. So here we go. Episode number 91 with Bill Brewer. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And today I have Bill Brewer on the phone. How are you doing this morning, Bill?
I'm doing just fine. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you and the listeners of your podcast.
Well, we're happy to have you on the podcast. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a happily married guy who has 3 lovely grown children, and I work as a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, where I teach anatomy and physiology and exercise physiology. So I'm still doing that kind of job and doing that kind of work at the university, which is really, really interesting. But I am now venturing into thriller writing, and I'm really excited to be able to share with your listeners a bit about that process and a bit about my books, the David Dygert series of thrillers.
And did you always wanted to write thrillers?
Yeah, I guess I would say so, because I really sort of started creative writing way back as a teenager. And, you know, it kind of took a sideline to a lot of other things going on in my life, raising kids and working at the university. But there was always that desire to want to tell a story. And I've been a big fan of thrillers, you know, my whole life. And I just was always pulled to that genre and had that sense of, one day I'm going to do this kind of thing. I would take writing classes and read books on how to write a book and that sort of thing, and do a lot of trial stories, but never really found something that I thought was truly publishable until I came upon this series of stories that I've recently published.
Can you tell us about those stories and about your character, David Dygert?
Yeah, sure. So currently there are 2 stories, and a third one is on its way. David Dygert is a relatively young man from a very difficult background, finds himself with few options in life, ends up in a situation where he's kind of coerced into becoming a hitman and becoming an assassin, which is never something he intended for, but then actually turns out he's pretty capable and pretty good at it. So the crux for the character is that he's really good at something that he really doesn't like doing. And I wanted to have that sort of dichotomy because it creates a tension within the character that then I think makes a compelling entry for people reading the story. You get the sense that this guy's really good at something that he really doesn't want to do. And there may be people who can think about certain things in their life where they're good at something, but they don't really want to do it. And that sort of dichotomy creates a tension within the character. Once you kind of have that tension in the character, then you place him into situations and circumstances where he kind of has to act or very bad things will happen to him or to people he loves or to innocent people. And now you've got a tension built within him, and then you're filling the scenarios with tension that are resolved with action. And then I think it becomes a more compelling story.
And the first book is Dawn of the Assassin.
Correct. Yeah, Dawn of the Assassin is the first one. So I do describe it as the origin story of David Dygert, sort of, who was this guy? He was really just a normal person until the circumstances that presented themselves created someone who becomes an assassin. And then the second one, Blood of the Assassin, he comes to find out more about a clandestine organization that has been hiring him, which at first he didn't even know who was hiring him because his assignments came through the web. Now he kind of is learning about this organization, and the readers are learning about, whoa, there's this big, behind the scenes powerful organization that has the capacity to be able to order up assassinations in order to maintain their position of power within the world, within global markets, within a geopolitical scenario that I've kind of created. So I think it's an exciting next step for readers who've read the first one to see what happens in the second one.
Yeah, I love your cover too. I'm looking at the cover of Dawn of the Assassin. It's right on target.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Before you started writing your thrillers, who were some of the authors that influenced you?
Yeah. So if I go back to being a kid, I can remember reading Call of the Wild by Jack London. And, that was an assigned reading that we had to do in school. But I found it so exciting, so compelling, the wilderness, the kind of challenge that they had to face in Alaska and in the Yukon. I thought it was great. Then I can even remember Huckleberry Finn. Now there's a classic, but that one's about a boy who's off on his own and no parental guidance, in an environment where there's lots of questionable characters. He has to use his wits and his guile to keep himself from getting in huge trouble. And I just thought that was really cool too, how this young kid had to be slick enough to be able to survive in these environments. But I also would say that authors that really influenced me as far as writing thrillers, one of them is Mark Graney, who's written the Gray Man series. And I love the Gray Man because he is a character who has to live by his own wits, who doesn't have a lot of backup. He doesn't have a government agency that's helping him. He's been burned by the CIA. So you get this real sense of an individualism. And instead of being slick and suave and walking around in a tuxedo, this guy lives in a cardboard box if necessary, rents an apartment in a dungy little basement if necessary. He's willing to go to ground in order to maintain his clandestine presence. And I just thought, now that's a lot more realistic than James Bond, walking around telling everybody his last name first, and I just thought the series really compelled me because it seemed to have a greater realism to it. But I'd also remark that I love Vince Flynn and Mitch Rapp. And Mitch Rapp is a character who has a lot of the same guile that you'll see in The Gray Man, but also does have a team behind him, does also represent the government. And although he sometimes is up against nefarious government agencies, even his own, you still find that there's a bit of a teamwork with him. So Mitch has a capacity to be able to call on individuals who will come and help him. He has the capacity to be able to draw a team together that then he leads in to resolve scenarios. And so there's a little difference in those two stories, but they're both led by these strong characters.
And so, what's your writing process? Do you outline, or do you just sit down and start writing the story?
I'm definitely an outliner. As a teacher, I outline unit plans, I outline lesson plans, semesters. It's all about making a plan before carrying it out. So in my writing, I do the same kind of thing. But what I really like about the outline is that it's really the brainstorming session. It's the where you take your imagination, you take the little bits and pieces that you've been thinking about, and then you put them together on bullet points. So I'll make like a I don't know, probably 500 bullet point outline, short sentences that are indicative of what happens next, what happens next. And sometimes you put in snippets of dialogue that you think will be really cool. And then you have this whole outline and you can look at it and say, maybe I need to move this bullet point down here. And if I do that, then this bullet point needs to go away, or I need to add something in. And you can kind of shift it around, kind of like a puzzle, if you will, until you have what you think is the right sort of concept of the story. And the developmental points, both in the plot and in the characters, all in bullet points. Then you've spent that time, and I find it's really fun. It's really the creative part. It's really the pulling together before you then go and turn it into prose. Now it's detail. Now it's dialogue. Now it's descriptions of action scenes so that they flow. It's relating it to scientific elements that might be coming in so that the reader can understand the whys and wherefores that you're proposing in the story. But all of that flows from the outline, with the outline being the basis. But, Alan, like I tell my students, the outline is written in electronic bits. It's not written in stone. Yeah. So when you go to write the story, if you find something in the outline is just not working, boom, you just adjust. You just move on and change something as necessary to make the story work. I can remember a scene in Dawn of the Assassin. There was this one character that Dygert meets, and in my outline, they were supposed to be friends. But when I brought the two characters together in the actual process of creating the prose, I just got this feeling like these two guys are not going to like each other. They're just not. And they didn't. And I went back and changed the whole story because they become combatants. They become confrontational. And it makes the story much, much richer, but it was sort of stepping away from the outline and saying, no, it's not going to work with them being friends.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I see a lot of people freak out about outlines, but yeah, it's not like it's you're forced to follow it if once you start writing it, it's not working.
I find what it does is it captures those elements of, I don't know, creativity that happen to you, here and there and everywhere, that you can't suddenly turn into prose. At the same time, it frees you from having to try to remember every darn thing that you've thought of, because you put it down in the outline and you've captured it. You can go back and reread it and say, oh yeah, I remember this. And sometimes even with the outline, you go back and you think, whoa, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. And you can just get rid of it then. I think as writers, we all recognize, right, that we think up, way more than could really go in the story. And we think about a lot of stuff that might be cool that turns out not to be cool, and you leave it out of the story so that you hone the story down to just the best stuff that you've come up with.
And what do you use to write and to do your outlines? Do you just use like Word or something else?
I do. I use Microsoft Word, and I find that when I write up one of these bullet point outlines, I can even use that structure to then go back and write the prose write the components of the stories that I want, and then just eliminate the bullet points as I go. I find also that bullet point process allows me to write scenes and not necessarily have to do them in order, which sometimes I'll find, well, here are the really coolest scenes or the scenes that I have the most sort of visceral response to. And so I'll go and I'll write those because they're kind of just bursting out of me. And then later I have to stitch them together with the transitions that make the story flow and make the story make more sense. And rather than kind of having to force the transition so I can go to the next thing, I'm already knowing what those cool scenes are so that now I can make that transition a little richer, make that transition a little more with a bit more foresight to kind of trigger the reader to say, ooh, maybe one more chapter, before they put it down. So I think that that's helpful too. When you know the content of the scene, I think you can enrich that element of transition.
And when you're actually writing the story, do you set goals? Like I'm going to write 1,000 words a day, or what's your process there?
Yeah, I like that idea, but I know that right now, between what I do with the university and the time I have, it's a little hard to stick to such clear goals. However, when I do have longer periods of free time, I will set goals like that. 1,000 words a day. I've done that. I've done 3 chapters a day where you're sort of cranking it out in rough draft form. I've also done goals with editing because I think the editing process is just so critically important, and sometimes maybe not the favorite of a lot of writers. But I find that the editing really gives you that opportunity to take that second thought, to take that re-examination, and to smooth the language, get rid of excessive words. So I'll also set a goal like I'm going to edit, 30 or 40 pages in a day.
Oh, okay. So that's cool. So you edit as you're writing it, or do you wait till the end?
I do generally wait till the end. I wait till I've sort of got the whole first rough draft. Then I go and back and edit the whole entire thing so that it's an edited draft before I share that with my beta readers. Then edit again after the beta readers before then handing it off to a professional editor who I've been working with lately, who then goes through and gives it a professional edit. I think for writers and writers listening and people maybe listening to this who are thinking about going into writing, that when you embrace the editing process, you recognize that writers are brilliant, of course, but it's not like first draft is out there. The editing process allows you to refine, reflect, and recreate until this body of work that you have then really becomes readable and entertaining and perhaps impressive. But the power of editing is to create something that then will hold people's attention and be worthy of their time to entertain them.
Especially writing with these type of thrillers, how much research do you put into each story?
Quite a bit. Here again, being in a university environment, in a science environment, everything's got to be supported. Everything's got to be evidence-based. Everything's got to be clarified in a way that we know that this is truth and factual. Well, of course, writing fiction, not everything has to be truth and factual, but it has to be plausible, and it has to be sensible, and it has to. Thriller writers are intelligent people, and they want to know that this story is at least based in truth, is presenting plausible ideas that then I'm willing to suspend my suspicions in order to enjoy a story of fiction. But to make that happen, the research has to be there to make your suppositions sort of plausible. And I think that when you're looking at creating stories that are sort of like, if not absolutely current, are in the near future. So the near future, you're going to be talking about technologies that are under development, technologies that are forthcoming, and then creating an interesting way in which forthcoming and near future technologies will spawn and introduce different types of human experiences and different elements of both moral and ethical behavior that I think is really at the crux of a good thriller, right? The antagonist is oftentimes the person who's looking to employ some type of new technology in a way that creates an advantage for the villain, an advantage that the villain usually sees as good, as plausible, as appropriate, but often has some nefarious ethics to it. So that kind of research is really, really interesting to me, because many of the colleagues at the university, they're working on stuff, technology stuff, that's going to be in the near future, things that are coming forth. And I kind of meet with these colleagues and talk with these colleagues, and then I take what I've learned from them and I take it another step with a fictional application, and I think that makes the thriller that much more compelling. I think it's also important to be able to research and identify locations, and to be able to describe locations in a way that allows the reader to feel like they're there, or at least for the reader to recognize that the character is there. What does it feel like to be in this location or in this place?
Yeah, that's amazing with your academic background that you should put that to good use for your research and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
And what do you think characterizes your writing? Like what compared to like other thrillers?
Sure. So I would describe my writing as fast-paced with intense action scenes and designed to display consistent character development. The plot is always important, of course, but I think readers really love characters, and they really love to see characters grow and develop. They want to feel the story through the character. And I like writing action scenes. I like making them intense, and I like keeping the pace of the story moving briskly. It's a challenge to find how briskly can I keep the story moving while making sure that the character's development is occurring through these scenes. So that's what I would describe my story for readers who are considering whether or not trying one of my books is worth it.
So you're working on the second book right now. When's that going to be out?
That's going to be out in March. So Blood of the Assassin takes Dygert deeper into this clandestine organization that he finds out at the end of the first book that he's actually working for. And this organization has some specific missions for which they have targeted Dygert as their assassin. When I write this, I try to write the point of view of Dygert as if, as a reader, you don't really know any more than Dygert knows. And so this nefarious plan, it's referenced, it's discussed within this organization, but it is not identified. And you as a reader, you are right there with Dygert, learning what there is to know as he learns it. When we say things like that's on a need-to-know basis, well, that's Dygert. He doesn't know things until he needs to know them, And at that point in time, boom, he's got to take an action. So I like kind of pulling the reader into the character's point of view and keeping them there so that they're learning as he's learning.
What are your future plans for the series? Do you planning to continue writing about his adventures?
I do have the third book is currently being edited. It's in the professional editor's hands, so that one will be forthcoming maybe sometime in the summer. Then I have 2 other stories written in rough form for Dygert, so there's 5 stories altogether. And if people really like these books and they do well, I will continue to write about him. I have some other thriller ideas that I've outlined and that I would also consider working on and creating. But I think I'm going to kind of see how Dygert does as my intro character. You know, when I started this process, just sort of looking at the market, you just sort of see that the best stories seem to come in a series, all the way from Robert Ludlum, Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn, Mark Graney, yourself with your 3 books. So I thought to myself, well, I shouldn't just write one book, I should write several, and then be ready to put the next one out and the next one and the next one, because it takes, months to write a book, and it takes readers hours to finish reading one. So it's hard to write them at the pace that people read them. So trying to keep ahead of that interest is one of the challenges we all face, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a big one for me because things have changed. I think people used to expect just like one book a year, and now they want more than one book a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Something on a little personal note. I noticed on your website that something that catalyzed to actually start writing these stories was you survived colon cancer and you had an early detection colonoscopy. I just had mine last month, and I dragged my feet on doing it for about a year. So, so I read that and I was like, whoa.
Well, I certainly hope your colonoscopy came back negative.
Yes, it did.
But I do like to remind people that and I'm glad you brought it up, Alan, because I was, and I am a fit, active guy, and I just figured, look, I don't need to do this. I'm the fittest guy around. But the truth was that I was without symptoms at all. And so I was most shocked when they said, no, you've got a tumor in there, buddy. And I was very, very fortunate that the cancer that was performed was successful, that there was no metastasis, and it took 5 years worth of checking to get to the point of being said, okay, you're cured. So I was very, very lucky and very, very fortunate, and I very much credit it to going and getting the colonoscopy because I was 50 for no other reason, and being lucky that it was found early. But what that really did for me was take that notion of, well, hey, someday I'm going to write a book, to sort of realize, well, buddy, your somedays may not be quite so many. And so it just made me say, look, my life is great, family's great, career's great and all that, but here's this one thing I do want to do before the end of my days, and I'm going to do it. And so it did serve as the sort of fire under my butt to go through the process, do all the editing, find the publisher, work with the publisher, get it out there, do the marketing, do all of that, was kind of realizing that time was now. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, and as much as I was dreading it, the prep part was the worst. The actual colonoscopy was like they put you under, so it's like easy peasy.
You're absolutely right about that. The prep part is no fun. You've got several hours on a toilet there, but the actual process is relatively easy. Right, relatively easy. And then when you get good news like yours, what a relief, eh? What a relief. And then you don't have to worry or wonder. And if you find out early, kind of like I did, then there are treatment options that can be very effective. And I'm a case in point for that. And if you don't, then who knows what happens, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that can be bad. Yeah.
Yeah, well, glad it turned out okay for you and that you're doing well. And now we have these great thrillers coming out. So,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah. So, all right, Bill, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. And for the listeners, probably the best place to find and learn about you would be your website, billbrewerbooks.com.
Yep, that's correct. All the social media is connected through there, Facebook and Twitter. But yes, they can find out quite a bit of information, even about the colonoscopy, right there on the website. So I hope people take a chance to look at that.
Okay, thanks so much, Bill, for being on the podcast. It was nice talking to you.
Okay, my pleasure, Alan. You have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.